March the 12th, 2012, saw the annual meeting of Holbeach Parish Council at the Church Halls, Church Street, Holbeach. The meeting began at 7 p.m. with apologies. Then the minutes of the 2011 annual Parish Council meeting were read out, approved and signed as a true record of that meeting. In matters arising, members of the public could speak. With nobody wishing to speak, Mr. Pole raised his hand to speak, to which the chair of the council, Councillor Rita Rudkin, asked, "Are you a parishioner?" To which Mr. Pole replied, "What do you mean by that?" She said, "Well, do you live in the parish?" Mr. Pole replied, "I've already spoken to South Holland District Council about this. This is a public meeting. It doesn't matter whether I am a parishioner or not a parishioner." The Vice Chair, Councillor Warrender, was then to speak to Councillor Rudkin, apparently to tell her that Mr. Pole was correct. It was a public meeting. So Councillor Rudkin was to let Mr. Pole speak. Mr. Pole was to say, "I have a question for the Chairman of Allotments, Councillor Mayle. Can he explain why, in his allotment inspection reports between 2006 and 2011, he has never mentioned the block of allotments known as Bass?" Councillor Mayle looked right towards Mr. Pole, then looked left, and then said, "Where's Bass allotments?" To which another councillor told him it was next to the Crownfield allotments. He then slowly got up to his feet and said, "Well, I've always considered them to be part of the Crownfield." Councillor Rudkin then butted in, "I'm fed up with this going on about the allotments. Why don't you go and see Councillor Mayle in private and take it up with him then?" Mr. Pole replied, "I've already been to Councillor Mayle's house to discuss this. It was on the afternoon of the evening that PC Braid turned up in uniform and had a go at two councillors. Councillor Mayle came to the meeting and just said nothing to report." Councillor Rudkin was then to put in, "You'll have to stop. You'll have to stop." Mr. Pole replied, "Madam Chair, what is the point of going to discuss a boundary dispute with the Chairman of Allotments who doesn't know where his allotments are?" Councillor Rudkin started banging the table and said, that's it, I'm closing the meeting." To which Mr. Pole replied, "You just want a cover-up, don't you?" The flustered Chair of Council then told Mr. Pole he would have to leave, to which Mr. Pole replied, "You just want a cover-up. I'm not leaving. What are you going to do? Call the police?" Mr. Pole just stood there. After about a minute, Mr. Pole was still standing there, and he said, "Hasn't any one of you got a mobile phone? It's 101 or 999. To which Councillor Barter replied, "Give me a chance. I'm getting my mobile phone." As Councillor Barter got his mobile phone out, Mr. Pole sat down, while councillors talked between themselves while waiting for the start of the March council meeting. Councillor Barter was to shout out, "Can't you lot be quiet? I'm on the phone to the police, you know." Soon afterwards, he was to ask the councillors, "Is Mr. Pole dangerous?" Councillors looked stunned, and he repeated it, "Is Mr. Pole dangerous?" No one answered him. And then Mr. Pole jumped up and said, "I'm a nutter. I'm an axe-wielding maniac. Can't you see me?" Mr. Pole sat down. You could hear a pin drop in the room, and then Councillor Barter saying to Police Control, "He's dangerous," when Councillor Barter put his mobile phone down. Councillor Rudkin opened the March Parish Council meeting. It was agreed that item 18 on the agenda should be moved forward, the appointment of the new clerk. It was then said that this is a staffing matter and should be taken in committee. Councillor Turl disagreed, saying it was public money that was being spent and it should be discussed in public. The clerk was to state that the councillor took advice on the matter and it should be discussed in private, in committee. Councillor Turl was then to say that he was not happy with this and that he wanted a vote on the matter. When asked if that was a proposal, he said yes, and it was duly seconded. The proposal that the appointment of the new clerk be discussed in public was defeated 7-6. When the chair declared the vote and stated that the matter would be discussed in committee, Councillor Turl stood up and said he could no longer serve on the council, and walked round to where the chair and the clerk sat and handed in a resignation letter, to be followed by Councillor Johnson, Councillor Carol Rudkin, Councillor Yvonne Jones, Councillor Michael Barter and Councillor Valerie Gimmel. They then left the room. After a brief interlude, when one or two councillors needed a glass of water, the meeting was to continue. In matters arising, Councillor Rita Rudkin asked Councillor Peter Savoury if he was going to resign or not, as he had said at the February meeting he was going to resign. He said he had changed his mind. The clerk added that a resignation was not official until which time it had been received by the clerk in writing. After about 20 minutes from the initial phone call to the police, PCSO Jane Gardner arrived. She was to come into the council meeting and go and speak to Councillor Arthur Mayle. She was then to go and speak to Mr. Poll, who was sitting between the fireman and a county councillor, listening to the meeting, and ask him if she could have a word with him outside. Outside, Mr. Poll was to tell her that he had done nothing wrong. It was a public meeting, and members of the public could speak in the meeting. She said if he went back towards the building, she would have him arrested. But the only person she had spoken to in the council meeting as to what had happened was Councillor Arthur Mayle. The Councillor Mayle who wrote letters against Mr. Poll claiming he had done things he hadn't done, and did not want to do anything about the land that was in Mr. Palmer's garden, that was formerly Holbeach Parish Council allotments, rented from the Crown Estate. The meeting was to speed through, with Councillor Turl not being in the meeting due to his resignation. When it came to property, there was no report, with Councillor Johnson resigning. When it came to parks, there was no report, and when it came to cemeteries, with Councillor Gimmel resigning, there was no report. Somewhere in the confusion, Councillor Martin Howard had resigned. He was not at the meeting, but had sent a letter of resignation. Before the start of the council meeting, the council had one vacant seat. It now had 8. Tuesday, the 13th of March, was to see it mentioned on local radio that the police had been called to a parish council meeting in Holbeach on the morning of the 14th of March. The chair, Councillor Rita Rudkin, went to the parish council offices and handed her written resignation in to the clerk of the parish council. Thursday, the 15th of March, was to see the meeting covered in the local press, with the resignation of the chair of the council, Councillor Rita Rudkin. Councillor Graham Warrender became acting chair of the council, but his tenure as acting chair was to be the shortest in Holbeach Parish Council's history, lasting approximately 48 hours, as on the Friday morning he went into the clerk's office and handed his written resignation in. The council now had only 8 councillors. For the council to hold a meeting, it required 6 councillors to attend. The council seat that was vacated in January was advertised, but when it come to the end of nominations, nobody had put their name forward. So South Holland District Council was going to have to re-advertise that seat. That was not surprising, as they had struggled to co-opt councillors on before, and now joining the council would be seen to be supporting Councillor Mayle, who had done nothing about the fence that was erected on the allotments. The local newspaper was to put the meeting's report on its website and invite comments. These varied from serious to witty, and were an interesting read.